Talk around Star Fox Adventures usually revolves around two things: what it is and what it could have been. It's pretty common knowledge at this point that the game was originally meant to be a late N64 title called Dinosaur Planet, where you'd go on a Zelda-styled adventure swapping between two simultaneous storylines. We know how the story goes by now. After looking at the game during development, Shigeru Miyamoto recommends that Rare shifts to using the Star Fox IP for Dinosaur Planet, leading to story rewrites, cut content, and a shift in architecture from the N64 to the GameCube. I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I'm not remotely interested in mourning the fact that the game wasn't Star Fox 64 Part 2. It was an adventure game from the start. I'm not going to resent Adventures because it shifted to an IP of a different genre halfway through production. Development history can help contextualize why a game is the way that it is, but it doesn't change the fact that you need to evaluate the final product. And so, with that being said, how does Star Fox Adventures stand on its own 2 feet? The game starts with you riding a pterodactyl as someone who is not Fox McCloud, but instead an adventurer named Crystal. And right off the bat, problem number 1 with this game happens the instant these characters open their mouths. I'm sorry, I know this gets brought up a lot, but I gotta say, the decision to implement a fictional language in this game is silly. First off, it gets thrown out about a half hour into the game. Slippy ends up giving you a translator that makes all the dinos speak English anyways. Except for Crystal. It's confusing because if you're going to make the effort to make a fake language, you'd think they'd really lean into it, but they don't. Rare just rearranged letters in English to make the language, yet in the middle of the gibberish, characters say their names in English anyways.
General Scales, Hiku, Kohud, or Taskuki, Eve Dinosaur Planet.
Kia ora, General.
English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
And you know what's the kicker? This wasn't even the case in the original Dinosaur Planet.
I've had a garbled message from the wizard. Something about a floating mountain hidden within a storm. Try not to move. The wizard will help you.
He can't help me. Our king sent us here to protect him. But Scales appeared.
It just makes the decision to use a fake language all the more baffling. Anyways, this is General Scales. He's the leader of the Sharp Claw tribe and is responsible for breaking the planet apart. A small note on Scales here, but I love his character design. He's this Captain Hook looking guy with a massive sword and a horned helmet. You don't really see these more cartoonish designs for villains in mainstream games anymore outside of superhero stuff or the odd Nintendo original. So seeing a more stylized villain is honestly a nice change of pace. He also grabs Crystal by the neck and flings her off his airship like a fucking badass. Man, I can't wait to see more of him throughout the game. So Crystal escapes on the pterodactyl she rode in on and lands at Krazoa Palace. Here you learn how Scales and his crew came into the place and pillaged it, stealing the spell stones that keep Dinosaur Planet in one piece, as well as releasing 6 Krazoa spirits, which according to this guy are vital to the life force of the planet. Fortunately, there's one left in the palace for you to collect, so you get it by playing a basic ass memory game. You're then asked to return the spirit to a shrine down the hall, where you get ambushed by a peeping Tom who traps Crystal in a crystal. Also, I hope you like playing as Crystal, because she only has about 10 minutes of screen time after this cutscene. More on that later. Then the game cuts to the Star Fox team, where we see that the Great Fox has definitely seen better days. Turns out it's been 8 years since the events of Star Fox 64, and it looks like the crew's been out of work for a while. Enter General Pepper, who calls in to give Fox a new mission. He briefs the team on the state of Dinosaur Planet, and tells Fox to go answer a distress signal from the head of the Earthwalker tribe. With the mission set to restore Dinosaur Planet and a lead on what to do next when he gets there, Fox sets out to start the next mission. And that's the setup for Star Fox Adventures. I know that was a little long-winded, but I felt the need to explain the early moments of the game because of how radically different the opening is compared to any other Star Fox game in the franchise. And because it's so different, I find that talk of Adventures' inadequacies as a traditional Star Fox game overshadow discussion of the game itself. Something I think isn't mentioned enough is the fact that Star Fox Adventures had some great ideas when it came to its item management system. The choice to use the C-stick to cycle through items and commands in real time was really innovative. Most games around this time, adventure games or otherwise, required you to pause the game to equip items and the like. This style of item management wasn't really popularized until the 2010s, and because of Star Fox Adventures' relatively small item count, the menu helps keep the flow of the game moving rather than becoming intrusive. The same goes for Fox's movement as well. He moves at a comfortably fast pace that feels like a natural smoothing out of Link's control from the N64 Zelda games. Actually, that applies to his staff swings too, and his climbing, and jumping off ledges, and... oh boy. Okay, this needs to be addressed right now that, yes, Rareware was inspired by Ocarina of Time during the development of Star Fox Adventures. And man, they were really inspired, huh? I'm not going to hold that inspiration against the game, though. You have to remember that Dinosaur Planet was in development right as Ocarina of Time revolutionized the 3D gaming landscape, particularly for the adventure genre. The DNA of mechanics like Z-targeting are still being used by modern games today. So, for Star Fox Adventures to be one of the earliest high-profile adventure games to come out after Ocarina of Time, heavily borrowing key mechanics from a landmark release is understandable. What I will hold against the game is the complete botchery of their new item management system with a terrible control scheme. Zelda's controls are pretty simple. The A button is used to roll and interact with the world, B is used for your sword, R to shield, Z for seed targeting, and the rest of the C buttons were for items. Simple, reliable. Now, Rare looked at that and said, nah, dude, let's just make it take forever to do anything. So get this, staff swinging and interactions on A, rolling on X, targeting and shielding on the shoulder buttons, then first-person view on Z, and putting the staff away on B, leaving the only eligible buttons for items on Y. Why? What's the point of muddying up the controls like this? The game essentially robs you of 3 item slots with actions that could have easily been consolidated into singular buttons. This leads to fumbling around with your inventory quite often, because everything needs to use the Y button. Tricky commands, staff abilities, giving key items to NPCs, you name it. I can't imagine how much of a nightmare it'd be if you had to pause the game every time you had to use something new. Imagine playing Ocarina of Time, but 95% of your inventory worked like the iron boots. Also, guess how the future Zelda games ended up mapping their buttons. Woof. I'm not quite done with the Zelda comparisons, though. I mentioned before that Fox uses a staff like Link uses a sword. Now, why is a sci-fi protagonist not using some sort of space weapon? Well, as General Pepper so eloquently puts it,
Okay, General, but what about a weapon? Why couldn't I bring my blaster?
It's always the same with you, Fox. Shoot first, ask questions later. This mission is about saving the planet, not blowing it up.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
So yes, Fox is going to be using a staff to fight enemies in this game. And you don't really have to use your head for it either, because the combat mechanics are painfully basic. First off, Adventures bungles the Z targeting system by making the targeting automatic. If you have your staff out, you'll target the closest enemy to you no matter what. A minor inconvenience when you're exploring, sure, but that's not the main problem. No, that would be the fact that you can't change which enemy you're focusing on when you're Z targeting. This forces you to take on one enemy at a time instead of being able to fluidly change targets in a fight. That's awkward. And you know what doesn't help with that? The fact that the enemies you're targeting don't attack you at all. If I don't have to be aware of my surroundings when I engage a group of enemies, then you're undermining the point of having a group of enemies to fight. Remember the encounter between 2 Iron Knuckles at the end of Ocarina of Time, where both of them would swing at you, and when you attack one, you had to be aware if the other was going to swing at Link? That was a great way to challenge players with tough enemies, with an environment that you had to keep in mind in order to win. Star Fox Adventures does not do this. But there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and it's probably the most criticized aspect of the combat system: the staff itself. Remember, you only get to fight one enemy at a time, so if this system is going to be fun, you'd hope that there's engaging, creative ways to take people down, right? Well, the staff works about how you expect. You have a simple 3-hit combo to attack with. That alone isn't a problem, but then you realize that that's one of the only ways to attack. No special slashes over the head or back, no parrying, nothing. Sure, you can vary the animations by holding the control stick in a different direction during the combo, but they all deal the same amount of damage. So in reality, the different combo animations just serve to waste your time. Oh, and the enemies have health meters, and most of them require 6 hits to kill. So you know what that means? Every enemy you wail on will make you wait out your 3-hit combo twice, and it takes forever. Not only is the staff itself bare bones, but every aspect of the combat breaks your momentum and turns fighting into a slog. Don't believe me? Well, how's about we sit through the first encounter of the game?
Shouldn't you be working?
I got someone to cover for me.
I'm sorry, did I bore you with 40 seconds of mashing the A button? Well, too bad. That's the game. Your staff abilities don't help much either. The most you get are small fireballs that only make a dent if you can spam them at close range, as well as an ice blast that can freeze opponents, and once frozen, you can kill them in one hit. This is only useful for killing, what, the 5 enemies with shields in this game? Once you understand that, you've solved the combat. Freeze the enemies with shields, press A. Everything else? Press A 6 to 9 times depending on how fast you want to mash. It's boring. So much so that after the first hour, I just ran past every enemy instead. They don't drop money, they don't drop loot. If you're lucky, they might drop a health pickup. But other than that, there's no incentive to engage in fights. So every encounter ends up wasting my time. I really wish you could have used the bomb flowers in this game as grenades to add some sort of variety to the combat, because the rest of the staff abilities don't pick up the slack. Speaking of those staff abilities, they're mainly used for completing puzzles in the overworld with little to no combat use. While the fire and ice blast are the most commonly used out of the bunch, typically for hitting switches or putting out fires to solve puzzles, I wouldn't say that they're fantastic. The fire blast requires you to aim with the control stick, which means you'll be swinging the staff everywhere to try and get a precise shot. Sticks are bad for aiming in general, so this is unsurprising. This issue comes up a lot because this game leans really hard on fire blast puzzles. The rocket boost is unremarkable because you only get to use it at specific paths in what's effectively a shorter ladder climb. It might have had a lot of potential as a movement option in combat, but that's not what we get, unfortunately. The ground pound sits firmly in the lame category because of how slow it is, with it stopping your momentum for an attack that doesn't even do that much damage. You know what's also in the lame category? The Sharp Claw costume, which is only used to sneak past one enemy and pick up a barrel in CloudRunner Fortress, and this one that opens like, what, 3 doors? Well, I might not like the combat, but this is still an adventure game, and there's more to Star Fox Adventures than just fighting. So, once Fox lands on Dinosaur Planet, he meets with Queen Earthwalker. She begs Fox to save her son, Prince Tricky, at Snowhorn Wastes. Fox obliges and travels to the area, where he finds the prince getting bullied by 2 Sharpclaw in a cave. You end up having to race these 2 enemies down a slope, and this introduces the hover bike segments. When I played the game for the first time, I was under the impression that you had to kill both enemies because running into the bikes clearly hurts them. It wasn't until later that I found out that the goal of the first bike segment was to race to the bottom. I wish the game was a bit clearer on that. I don't see why there couldn't have been a line of dialogue where one of the Sharpclaw mentioned getting to Tricky first or something. Anyways, these segments control well enough, and the speed you can get going at provides a nice little break from the regular gameplay. You then get to the bottom after the longest falling sequence of all time. This is where you meet Tricky, the game's partner character. I know a lot of people find Tricky to be an annoying obstacle in Star Fox Adventures, but I don't think that's the case at all. In fact, he's probably one of the more mechanically sound partner characters you'll find in any adventure game. Tricky's pathfinding does a great job at tracking you wherever you're at, and you can always call him over with a command if need be. Over 2 full playthroughs of Star Fox Adventures, his AI only locked up on me once. I'd call that a win. His abilities are oriented towards solving puzzles and uncovering perishable items in the overworld, and are all performed reliably thanks to the cycling C-stick menu making them easy to access. He also has a hunger mechanic in play whenever he uses an ability, though I never found myself with a shortage of mushrooms to feed him. The devs did a good job at spreading mushrooms in logical areas around the map, and placing them in spots where Tricky's abilities are required to solve a puzzle, so you're never stuck scrounging for mushrooms. Overall, Tricky is a pretty competent sidekick whose mechanics work as intended, giving the gameplay some much needed variety. Now, if we're talking about the character himself, yeah, he's pretty annoying.
Hot spring, or you'd be frozen by now.
Why, you little...
Hey, I wouldn't if I were you. My dad's a king earthwalker, and he'll bash you up.
Notice there's something hidden at the top of that huge temple. It looks like a Krazoa shrine entrance.
Oh yeah, I could have told you that.
It's like they made Milhouse a smoker, then asked him to voice Tricky. I'll touch on the voice acting in general later, but with Tricky's voice being this whiny, it makes him an actively irritating character to watch on screen. That being said, I mentioned that Tricky's abilities were used to interact with the world around you, so why don't we take a moment to talk about the level design. Star Fox Adventures' level design is linear by nature, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. With so many franchises pushing for massive open worlds these days, I think a lot of people discredit the merits linear games have. Experiencing a game in a more structured manner can lead to developing game mechanics that iterate on each other over time, like puzzles that revolve around an item in a Zelda dungeon, or levels in platformers challenging you in new ways in later levels. Likewise, linear games also allow for more traditional storytelling to create an engaging narrative. Final Fantasy VII wouldn't make much sense if you could beat Shinra before they dropped the plate on Sector 7, for example. With that being said, I don't think Adventures capitalizes on the advantages of linear level design. Areas are connected by long hallways that never branch out. Because of this, important locations on the map are joined by spots I like to call junctions. These junctions are found when you reach the end of a hallway between two locales, and they're always structured in the same way. It's a cylindrical room where you must descend down the middle of the room, then walk all the way around to the other side, where you'll climb back up and exit to the next hallway. The design rarely changes, and they serve to waste your time because you never find a way to traverse them any faster than you did the first time. There's no switches that reveal a bridge, no clearing a fence, nothing. Why does this matter so much, you ask? Because this game makes you backtrack through these areas all the time. Backtracking is the lifeblood of Star Fox Adventures. Done with something in Snowhorn Wastes? Go back to ThornTail Hollow. Just finished getting a Spellstone in DarkIce Mines? Go back to ThornTail Hollow. Then go through Moon Mountain Pass to get to Volcano Forest Point Temple. Then back through the pass. But wait, you have to complete the area on the trip back. Then back to the Hollow, back to the other side of the map, then back to the Hollow, then off to the next floating chunk, back to the Hollow, back to the place you were just at to turn the Spellstone in, then back to the Hollow.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
Backtracking bogs down the game tremendously, and it doesn't help that these hallways themselves are, unsurprisingly, barren. There's a shocking lack of collectibles in the overworld, and if you do find something, it'll be fuel cells or money. Heart pieces aren't a thing in this game, because you get heart containers at the end of each major area. There are no damage upgrades, combos to unlock, new items to find, and no, the 3 magic expansions don't count. Why? Because of how easy they are to find. One is basically force-fed to you when you get Tricky's dig command 30 minutes into the game, and the other is in the most obvious location above the shop in ThornTail Hollow. If you miss these, you're either doing a challenge run or you're catatonic. As you can tell, this leaves the overworld pretty short on secrets to hide, making exploring completely useless. I vividly remember this area of DarkIce Mines. You get a gear to plug into this machine that's located behind the base of this waterfall to get a bridge to extend. As you watch the cutscene, you notice that there's a plant that replenishes magic at the top of the waterfall. After crossing the bridge, you meet a Snowhorn that teaches Tricky how to use his flame command. So, knowing this, you return to the previous area and happen to notice you can actually get to the plant from the other side of the wall. Well, I melted the ice with Tricky, walked over to the plant, and nothing. It was just the plant. No puzzle, no digging spot, just the goddamn plant. I don't think I can sum up this game's level design any better than that. The dungeon-esque areas of the game are better than the overworld, mostly because their enclosed structures allow for a denser concentration of puzzles over the map. DarkIce Mines and CloudRunner Fortress are the clear standouts of the bunch. DarkIce Mines features large open sections in the snowy POW camps at the start, with the level becoming more focused on light platforming and barrel puzzles as you descend lower into the mines. This section, where you carry explosives all the way up the scaffolding while avoiding Donkey Kong style barrels on the catwalk, is particularly challenging. I'm also fond of this ice room where you drop stalactites into the water to create platforms to solve puzzles. Plus, the music was great. The boss fight here is Galdon. Now, he looks awesome. The lighting in the arena is top notch, his model looks great. I just wish the fight were a bit better. It suffers from having unclear patterns. In both phases, you need to attack a weak point on his body so that he swallows you, where you can then knock the spellstone loose. But how you get to those weak points is unclear. Why does he stop turning here and not there? Why can't I roll under his legs to get to the tail? It's a little vague, and it muddies up what's otherwise a decently fun boss fight. Likewise, CloudRunner Fortress reins in the wider scope into a more confined structure of a fortress. Some story events lead to mild stealth elements being introduced for one section in the prison, but after that you need to find various gems to activate wind currents to progress. You also have to save 4 CloudRunner children from Sharpclaw later on under a time limit, and it tests you on how fast you can memorize the layout of the fortress. This one in particular on the outer tower requires a bit of quick thinking to access a rocket boost to reach him. The area also features a barrel puzzle at the end that really should have been the blueprint for the dungeon's puzzles as a whole. To open the door that leads to the CloudRunner's treasure vault, you have to take a barrel from the ground floor. Then you have to walk all the way around the side of the fortress, run through some hallways, then get to the switch to reverse the airflow before the barrel explodes. I wish the rest of the puzzles in the fortress featured taking items up and down airways like this. It reminds me of a section in Ganon's Tower in Ocarina of Time where you had to use different boot types to move Link across the room via fans on the walls. Without that, this section ends up being a little bland after the initial stealth segment. There's no boss fight here, by the way, just one of these races on the jet bike, except this time you do have to kill all the enemies. I don't have anything new to say about these segments, so I'm a bit disappointed that it replaced a boss fight. Walled City and Dragon Rock are clear examples of the devs cutting content. They're both one big area centered around a tall structure, whether that be a pyramid or a tower, with miscellaneous things to do on the edges of the map. Walled City consists of symmetrically alternating puzzles around the square map until you get the items needed to get to the boss. None of these challenges are all that engaging, but its biggest crime is completely fumbling the usage of the T-Rexes. So the second you land, you see a whole bunch of these guys roaming around the central pyramid. Then you walk past one of these T-Rexes. The music gets all dramatic, they charge at you and take a bite and... What? It did 1/4 of a heart of damage? What the hell? Alright, I've been waiting to pull the trigger on this point the whole video, but I wanted to talk about it here because of how egregious it is. Enemies in this game are a complete joke, and shatter any immersion you could have had with this game's enemies. There isn't a single one that can do a full heart of damage to you in this game. Not the Sharpclaw with shields, not the ground lizards, sure as hell not the million stock Sharpclaw you fight. The fact that the T-Rexes are the weakest enemy in the game is such an asinine decision that I'm still in shock as I write this. The way you defeat them is so underwhelming too. The area staff upgrade is a stronger version of your ground pound so you can kill the red eyes, right? So you just walk up to one, do the ground pound, tank their pathetic hit, and watch them curl up into a ball like a bitch for the second hit. It doesn't stop there either. The boss for Walled City is a massive T-Rex called King Red-Eye. I'll talk about the fight itself in a second, but what's important is that if you get hit by him, you want to know how much damage he does? Half a heart. When you fuck up T-Rexes this badly in a game about dinosaurs, you've undermined the credibility of the dinosaurs in your universe. How the hell did the Earthwalkers lose to these guys anyway? And if they lost fair and square, how incompetent are they? I get the devs are probably short on time at this point, so making the Red Eye tribe super fun to fight might not have been realistic, but the least they could do is make these pussies somewhat threatening by hiking their damage output. What a waste of potential. As for King Red-Eye himself, the boss fight is really boring. It revolves around you throwing an explosive barrel at him once he's stunned with electric fields, which you activate by standing on floor panels when he's approaching you. The fight takes forever because you have to wait on him to walk all the way around the arena before you get a chance to stun him. And once you realize that the giant T-Rex does half the damage to you than the barrel you're holding, the intimidation factor goes out the window. Again, another cool looking boss that packs no punch. I guess I'll finish up with Dragon Rock now, which is where you really start to feel Rareware rushing the game. The map is even smaller than Walled City, and you just help these dinosaurs escape their cages, then beat the boss and leave. You ride all 3 of them around the map taking these towers out, and man, these stink. You're dealing with the Fire Blast oversensitive stick aiming to take down these aerial enemies, and these riding sections feel like they drag on for an eternity. They really don't though, because from the time Fox lands to the time he takes off with the Spellstone, I had spent 20 real-life minutes to complete Dragon Rock in full. This level would have been infinitely better if the riding segments were handled by the Arwing in a traditional Star Fox level, especially Dracor, who's the boss here. He's another case of missed potential. The game has the balls to put you in an on-rail shooting segment, only for it to be the jittery-ass Fire Blast controls. You just mash to win, you can barely get hurt, and Dracor's hitbox is awkward in that it doesn't seem to register hits sometimes. Another character bites the dust in a surprisingly sloppy boss fight. I just wish they did more with Dracor, because I think there's so much potential for this guy. Actually, put a pin in that. I'll touch more on Dracor when the time is right. So those are my thoughts on this game's level design. Bottom line, none of these areas are fun to explore. There's no optional collectibles to find, all the staff upgrades are force-fed to you on a linear path, with hallways that lead to predictable junctions that never change. All of this mixed with the fact that you have to run through these places over and over again to fight the same brain-dead enemies along the way. It just becomes draining to play. There's also a noticeable lack of verticality to the level design that oversimplifies these areas. One of the best parts of Zelda dungeons is the fact that you have to interact with puzzles over stacked layers of a temple. The Great Deku Tree, for example, asks you to solve your route to progression by first making you ascend the tree to learn about vertical space, then jump down from the top of the tree to break cobwebs to progress. The Water Temple does this a lot too by changing water levels to check how they affect rooms you need to enter. Adventures is entirely devoid of this type of design, and it robs these sections of the depth that they could have had. There's still a few spots I haven't touched on yet, but I'll tell you right now, none of them save these boring levels. On top of that, the boss fights don't help these areas out much because of how easy they are to beat, not to mention their tenuous connection to the narrative. Like the rest of the game, they leave a lot of meat on the bones, and are entirely unsatisfying. But hey, I might not like the fighting or the exploration, but adventure games also feature towns and other locations where you get to interact with the world you're playing in. And with Star Fox Adventures, these gameplay mechanics are, present? There's a reason I've been using words like areas or locations to describe sections of the map, and that's because calling these places towns would be a gross overstatement. Every major area is either a vehicle to get to the next spellstone, or one of the 4 floating chunks of rock in space. The only 2 spots that I might call towns would be Lightfoot Village and ThornTail Hollow. I'll start with Lightfoot Village because it's incredibly short. A misunderstanding with one of the tribe's members at Cape Claw leads you to getting kidnapped by the Lightfoot tribe. After you escape, they offer you access to a shrine if you do a couple of challenges, which include activating 3 totem poles around the village and mashing A. It gets you access to the shrine you need to get to, which you finish up in 5 minutes, and then you never come back. From the cutscene you're kidnapped to the minute you leave, Lightfoot Village took me about 20 minutes to complete. It's a complete waste of a town, especially because there aren't many NPCs outside of the chief's hut. There's just nothing else to do outside the main objective here, so there's no reason to come back to it. Also, it uses the same music as Walled City, which is really disappointing. ThornTail Hollow is a bit of a unique case, as it serves as the hub area for all your adventuring done on the surface. But even here, there's not much to this place. The major thing of note would be the shop in the center of the hollow, which features one of the game's few highlight characters, the shopkeeper.
Welcome to my store. Feel free to look at the many wonderful items within these walls. And if you like to play games, then enter the Scarab Room. Yes. Oh, and that's the exit.
Okay. Thanks.
Sometimes I forget this game was made by Rare, you know? The shop itself isn't all that remarkable though. You can buy perishable items, maps, and a few superfluous things that you use once or twice throughout the entire game. But here's the thing, you can barter with the shopkeeper to drive down the prices of items. Once you understand this, you'll be buying up the shop in no time. I got all the maps and almost all the items in under 2 hours before getting to DarkIce Mines, and I cleared out the shop after buying one last item after finishing DarkIce Mines in a little under the 3-hour mark. Adventures is an 8-hour game at minimum, so making the game's only shop irrelevant less than halfway through feels like such a waste. It's not like you're ever strapped for cash in this game. The levels pepper you with rocks and pots to find money. Oh, and before I forget, never buy Tricky's Ball. It's a shit item that permanently changes his skin to the most hideous colors you can think of. It's a waste of time. Don't bother with it. Then you walk outside the shop and realize there really isn't anything to do. The Earthwalkers have nothing interesting to say, Queen Earthwalker just regurgitates information to you, and that's it. It wasn't until about halfway through my first playthrough when I realized nothing was really changing in ThornTail Hollow that it dawned on me. Star Fox Adventures doesn't have any side quests. Woof. Do y'all realize how bad this is? Imagine playing an RPG with no towns or shops, or a fighting game that doesn't have any combos in it. Adventure games are made for you to explore and interact with the world. What's the point of talking to these NPCs if there's no incentive to interact with them in the first place? They're not even interesting to talk to. They all give you 1 or 2 lines of banal dialogue before fucking off. Hell, the NPCs in Sonic Adventure were more entertaining than these planks of wood. You get into this sort of malaise when playing this title, where you're still making progress, sure, but your eyes are glazing over in the process out of boredom. The barren level design, the brain-dead combat, the copious amounts of backtracking. Star Fox Adventures achieves this no man's land feeling that permeates throughout the whole experience. It's a game that doesn't anger, it annoys. It's a game that doesn't excite, it teases. It's a game that strips both the Zelda and Star Fox formulas down to their bare necessities and proceeds to do next to nothing interesting with them. Anyways, that's what I have to say about the gameplay for now. In short, the game's feedback loop is tedious. Its mechanics are as deep as a puddle, so while you're technically progressing in the game, the achievements feel hollow because you never feel that you grew in the process. There is still one major element that needs to be addressed though, and that would be Star Fox Adventures' story. Let me start off by saying that the quality of a narrative rarely ruins a game for me. There's plenty of titles that I like whose stories are either irrelevant or comically awful. If Star Fox Adventures had amazing gameplay, the story would have been good for a laugh and we'd all move on. But this is still an adventure game, a genre that's usually reliant on having an interesting story to make you want to explore the world. And with the gameplay in Star Fox Adventures being such a snooze fest, it really needs the story to be good to keep the player interested. And while there's some things that I like about this plot, you'll find that there's still a lot of meat left on the bones on this one. A lot of that comes from gutting the original Dinosaur Planet's lore during the shift to the Star Fox IP. Entire dinosaur tribes, supporting cast, villains, and even main characters were either cut or repurposed in the transition. Because of this, Star Fox Adventures is in a weird spot in that some areas of the script follow the same basic story beats as Dinosaur Planet, others center around old characters who've had their backstories removed, even scenes that are recycled nearly word for word with the original. With that being said, the story we ended up getting is perfectly fine, and I think it ends up fitting in with the rest of the franchise. Clearly, the genre shift leads to a more traditional approach to storytelling, and personally I'm all for it. Star Fox is a sci-fi series, and the fact that most of the games don't spend much time fleshing out the adventures the team goes on is a huge missed opportunity for creative world building. Adventures is the first game that gives the player a closer look at one of the planets you're saving, which the rest of the series rarely does. Star Fox could really benefit from centering games around individual adventures in the Lilat system. It would give each installment an opportunity to expand the series' lore in new and interesting ways, without interfering with the Star Fox vs. Andross narrative. It could give the supporting characters on the team some time to develop as well, giving an already likable cast more depth than before. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If there's one thing that works in Star Fox Adventures' story, it's Fox himself. While a lot of the dialogue has its DNA rooted in the lines for Saber, one of the original main characters Fox replaced, I find that this new characterization fits him really well. We were only shown the confident team leader side of Fox in previous games, so the new smartass attitude he's got is a welcome addition. This game is also one of the only ones that recognize that the Star Fox team are mercenaries for hire, with Fox mentioning getting paid a decent bit early on in the game. This and his more sarcastic comments remind me a lot of the old Nintendo Power comic version of Fox back in the early 90s. I think he should be more like this in future games, and his growth from being a mercenary only in the mission for the pay to becoming the hero doing the right thing and saving the planet is really satisfying to watch. Stephen Malpass's voice work really sells this new version of Fox, and he's honestly one of the only characters with good voice direction. Something I really appreciate about Star Fox 64 was Mike West's take on Fox's voice. Normally action heroes are the rugged fighters with the smooth, deep voice. Fox was different in that the pitch of his voice was a lot closer to normal, maybe even a little bit higher than average. But his lines were delivered like a confident commander, so he still felt credible as the leader of Star Fox. I think Assault really messed this up, where they gave Fox the more traditional voice, and it screws up the dynamic.
So, I guess that's the end of the Aperoids.
So the whole thing was just one big entity. She tried to bypass evolution by stealing souls, but you have to be born with one.
Mario will be talking a lot in the midships.
He's so cool.
Mario as performed by the very top.
He's so cool.
I think Fox's higher-pitched voice is really charming, and since Mike West reprised his role in future games, it cemented itself into my head when I think of the character, which is a good thing. Sorry for the tangent, I just wanted to appreciate that. Now, if you want to talk about characters that got hosed from the Dinosaur Planet transition, Crystal would be at the top of the list. She was one of the original main characters, and is now relegated to about 25-ish minutes of screen time. It's a shame too, because her original backstory was really interesting. Instead, we're told that she's an adventurer from the planet Ocarina, of which she's the only survivor of genocide.
Oh shit.
Anyways, she answers a distress signal, which is why she's in this game. But here's where things start to fall apart with Crystal. First of all, we see during the ending that she's got a spaceship of her own. So why exactly is she riding a pterodactyl at the start of the game? Actually, if she's answering a distress signal, how does she know how to speak dinosaur? She's from another planet. It doesn't make sense that she'd know the language. Also, I know a lot of furries drool over this character, but I'm gonna be that guy for a second. If she's from a different planet, her wearing this broad loincloth combo doesn't make sense. There aren't any other non-dino species on this planet, so her being the only character dressed like this sticks out like a sore thumb. Seriously, just dress her like Lara Croft from the 2013 Tomb Raider and call it a day. Anyways, you don't really get to learn too much about Crystal because she's barely in the story. The original Dinosaur Planet had a lot more time to flesh her out, partly because she was one of the main characters, but also because Rareware actually used her for more than 20 minutes. Also, she only speaks English in the scenes before and after the final boss, so Estelle Ellis's voice work feels completely misused here. Like I mentioned before, Dinosaur Planet was voiced in English, and hearing Crystal sound normal was definitely a trip. I really like Ellis's performance here. She gives the character a confident, but also a kind disposition that I really enjoy.
Crystal, you found me! It's good to see you again, Kite. Now, let's get you back to CloudRunner Fortress. Are you okay?
What sort of dinosaur are you? You look pretty strange to me.
It's okay, you don't need to be scared. What have you got there?
I found this on the beach. Here, girl, you take it. You're gonna need it.
She reminds me a lot of Mrs. Brisby in The Secret of Nim, and it's a shame that version of her got lost in translation and adventures. As it stands, Crystal is a boring character due to lack of screen time. She also spends 80% of her 20-minute runtime speaking this stupid, goddamn language. Fuck, this shit sounds stupid. Tricky is the other character you'll spend the most time with in Star Fox Adventures, though I covered most of what I had to say about him in his gameplay section. The only new thing I have to add is this plot point in Cape Claw. You rescue the queen of the CloudRunner tribe, who opens the gate for you to access CloudRunner Fortress. But instead of going with you, Tricky decides to be racist.
A CloudRunner! Shoo! Go away, CloudRunner! Get away!
Have you two met?
You'd think Fox would correct him or scold him in some way, but no, he lets Tricky sit the mission out because he can't stand CloudRunners. This could have jeopardized the mission too, because Queen Earthwalker says only a dinosaur of noble birth can activate the Spellstones. The only other character of note is General Scales, but even then, he suffers from the same problems Crystal does. The guy is barely in the game because he's on screen for under 5 minutes. Yes, I counted the time. The only thing I find interesting about him is the idea of General Scales. The concept that you're going on an adventure to save a planet from a tyrant is such a stable concept in fiction that I'm stunned the game did such a poor job building him up. The most you get are some NPCs mentioning that he's a bad guy, but the game's environments tell you nothing about the effects that his reign has had. Could you tell that Cape Claw or Walled City had been overrun by Sharpclaw? The least they could have done would have been to fly some banners or something. Oh, and all that buildup would have gone out the window by the end anyways, but I'll get there when I get there. I mentioned before that I liked Scales' design, but I didn't mention that voice actor John Silk did a great job with the character. He gives us an energetic, even intimidating performance for General Scales that really sells him as the game's big bad. He also did plenty of voice work on other characters, a theme for the few voice actors this game had. Estella Ellis doesn't just do Crystal, for example. She did Queen Earthwalker and this random ThornTail as well. Silk did great with General Scales, but he was pretty hit or miss with the NPCs, like all the ThornTails, the Snowhorn, General Pepper, Rob. God damn! His best work, though, was easily the Warpstone. He sounds like Shrek and has that classic snark rare characters are known for.
Well, can you help us?
Help you? No.
But you're a Warpstone. You're supposed to help.
Right. Let's see if I can remember what I'm supposed to do.
Wait a minute, I haven't talked about the Warpstone yet, have I? Well, he serves one main function, to warp you to Krazoa Palace. Yeah, you thought I forgot about this, didn't you? So do you remember when Crystal got that weird spirit thing at the start of the game? Well, it turns out the only way to get her out of the crystal is by collecting the remaining 5 Krazoa spirits and delivering them to Krazoa Palace. You might also remember that these spirits are necessary for the planet to be put back together, so it works out. The 5 remaining spirits are found in Krazoa shrines, which are found across the world in different locations. Actually, you get the last one by default at the final boss, so there's really only 4 to find. Some might say this helps fill out the map a little bit, but honestly, it's just the same crap you've been doing all game. It's not like you have to look really hard for them, and you can't beat them out of order. They're on the same railroad track the game's had you on the whole time. Plus, every time you get a spirit from a shrine, it's just another backtracking trip to ThornTail Hollow so this asshole can warp you back to Krazoa Palace. The shrines themselves aren't particularly interesting. They're not unlike the shrines in Breath of the Wild, in that they're a set of small challenges that end in a main puzzle before collecting a prize. Shrines are over in 5 minutes, and the puzzles really aren't that engaging either, so I consider these a bust. Krazoa Palace itself tends to get a lot of flack, but it's not all that offensive to me. You ride these wind currents to access doors that block pedestals you deliver Krazoa spirits into. The return visits are never more than 10 minutes, and you're treated to some awesome music. So yeah, I hope you can see why I didn't feel the need to mention any of this earlier. Everything Krazoa related is just a symptom of the larger problems this game has, and are a pretty small part of the experience anyways. What I won't forgive is that this Warpstone doesn't send you anywhere else on the map. The backtracking problem would have been much more tolerable if you could at least warp to your preferred destinations. Seriously, even Fox calls this guy out on his bullshit.
Right there, Fox. Time for you to head down to the seaside. Check the signposts for directions.
Okay, big fella. Good to see you doing your job and helping out.
You cheeky little blighter.
Also, Fox is shown flying his R-Wing to Krazoa Palace at the end of the game, so the Warpstone ends up being completely useless. I don't think the overarching story is anything to write home about either. Each floating chunk's deal is that General Scales has come in and terrorized the place. I'll give it a quick pass, but the reality is none of the supporting characters you're helping stand out. DarkIce Mines involves you trying to liberate the Snowhorn tribe from slavery under the Sharpclaw, and you do this by finding the gatekeeper's daughter Belina Tay, who sold out the tribe to Scales for the sake of the group's safety. I like that there's some Snowhorn chained up at the start, and one being forced to work in the mines, but other than that, it's business as usual for the rest of the area. Also, Belina Tay is a sharp-clawed collaborator who throws a bitch fit when she gets called out.
I'm sorry, Belina, but he feels you have betrayed the beliefs of the gatekeepers. We were only sent to find the Spellstone.
Up yours, woke moralists. We'll see who cancels who.
CloudRunner Fortress is interesting for a second, because it's the only time you see General Scales outside of the end of the game. He's shaking down the CloudRunner Queen for your location, and has her beaten the fuck up. In fact, the original Dinosaur Planet version of the scene has Scales kill the Queen. You end up getting captured, then escape, and confront Scales in the treasure room. But here's something that doesn't make sense. Scales teleports away with his stupid bat belt. He threw a goon at you, so he's clearly physically present. If he could just warp away like this, why didn't he warp out with the Spellstone? Whatever. Walled City and Dragon Rock are also pretty lame. There isn't even a Sharp Claw presence in Walled City, and it's basically there for Tricky's dad to hide in the basement the whole time. Dragon Rock is over in 20 minutes, and you're basically just there to save the war buddies of this random guy in ThornTail Hollow. The premise is that Scales has gotten access to advanced tech, and that's how he took over the planet, and is using Dragon Rock as his base. But it kind of falls flat because Scales isn't even there. And now for the endgame. There's no extra level here. Once you get the last Spellstone, you're booted back to Walled City to collect the second to last Krazoa spirit. Once you turn it in, you're led to a special arena. And who else is there but General Scales? Man, I can't wait to finally fight this guy.
Stop! Scales! You are no longer any use to me. Your desire for power overwhelmed you and blinded you to the truth inside. Now give Fox what he's looking for. Give him the final Krazoa spirit.
You will regret this.
Well, that sucked. Anyways, it turns out the final boss ends up being, you guessed it, Andross. Lots of people throw a big stink over this, and they should. The story spends its entire runtime talking up General Scales as a massive threat, so I don't think you need me to tell you how much of a letdown it is that you don't even get to fight him. Most people seem to think that Scales was going to be the final boss before the Star Fox Dinosaur Planet merger, but that's actually not the case. In fact, Dracor was planned to be the final boss in the original, with Scales being a villain that would be supplanted as the big bad at some point in the game. This sheds some light as to why Dracor's design might have suggested that they had more planned for him, and it turns out they did. I get the logistics behind bringing Andross back, but the game does such a poor job foreshadowing it that it feels like it comes out of nowhere. Anyways, Andross is the final boss, and honestly, it's nothing special. It's essentially a remixed version of the fights with him in the original game and in Star Fox 64. The problem is that it takes forever to finish because you can't stun him by shooting his eyes anymore, so you have to wait an eternity before you get bomb drops to open him up. Also, despite my earlier complaints, the volume of ticky-tacky attacks from Andross can whittle down your health, so you actually have to pay attention to getting hit in this fight. What a compliment. After you finally beat Andross, Fox returns to the Great Fox. The planet is saved, Star Fox gets paid, even Falco comes back into the picture to rejoin the team. More on that later. Even Crystal comes in to personally thank Fox for saving her. And that's it. That's the end of the story. The main characters range from good to, absent. And not only are none of these supporting characters all that integral to the plot, but they're entirely forgettable. I didn't even mention the Lightfoots or this distraught Mother Thorntail, because they just don't matter that much. In a game that's supposed to be linear, it sure feels like this story takes forever. It's a narrative that's got fun ideas, but doesn't give them the runtime to develop. Like the gameplay, it's totally undercooked. Now I know that was a lot of negativity over the past however many minutes. But if there's one thing this game does right, it's without a doubt its presentation. There's no other way to put this. Star Fox Adventures is one of the best looking games on the GameCube. It uses a shading technique for fur and grass textures that allows them to animate in ways that games of the era never could before. So seeing Fox and Crystal's fur react to model movement, and the grass actually animate and sway with the wind was stunning for 2002. Also worth mentioning is the game's projection techniques to display light and shadow on character models, and they look amazing. And of course, how could I forget the beautiful water and reflection rendering? Star Fox Adventures really punches above its weight when it comes to the visuals, and it stuns me that all of this is running at a smooth 60 frames per second. Something else this game deserves flowers over is somehow getting everything to run without needing to use a single loading screen. Seriously, on a technical level, this game blew its competition out of the water. Know what else this game does right? It's music. David Wise returns to compose one last soundtrack for Rareware, and yes, I'm talking about that David Wise. The man who composed the Donkey Kong Country series on Super Nintendo knocks it out of the park again with this score, and it's a joy to listen to. Not only that, but the music will change on a room-by-room basis, giving each area its own unique atmosphere. Some standouts include Krazoa Palace for its mysterious, ancient theme, DarkIce Mine's Waterfall for this cold, melancholic piece, How about Dragon Rock, which sounds like it came straight out of a Terminator film? And of course, how could I forget the best song in the game, ThornTail Hollow Well. These short sound bites really don't do this score the justice it deserves. Give it a listen when you can, because I think it's one of the best soundtracks in Nintendo's history. Alright, that's about everything I can think of when it comes to Star Fox Adventures. I think it's about time we wrap it up here. Oh shit, right! The Star Fox part of Star Fox Adventures, how could I forget? Well, I think it's finally time we address the elephant in the room. I've placed this segment here for a reason. Star Fox Adventures is, first and foremost, an adventure game. If the original Dinosaur Planet released in the state Adventures did, we'd have all forgotten it as a mediocre, though technically impressive release. That's obviously not what happened though, and the game we ended up getting came out under the Star Fox IP. I mentioned before how the adventure genre could do wonders for the series' world building and ability to tell compelling stories, but unfortunately, those elements don't exist in a vacuum. And I'd say the Star Fox in Star Fox Adventures is lacking. The Star Fox crew, as you've probably gathered, take a massive backseat in this one. Peppy is now retired and just tells you where to go next on these unhelpful maps, and Slippy no longer flies our wings and is basically mission support. These two are seen in a couple of cutscenes and menus, but that's about it, which is a pretty big letdown considering one of the series' trademarks is the banter between teammates during live gameplay. You might have noticed that there's an important character I left out, and yes, Falco is missing. This isn't explained at all in-game, but the manual mentions that Falco ended up leaving the team between 64 and Adventures. Actually, if you want to know what really happened to him, you have to read a whole prequel comic. Yes, this is a thing. It's an official manga called Farewell Beloved Falco, and it details how the split up happened. I won't go into it too much here, but it's by far the most likable thing to come out of Star Fox Adventures. Falco rejoins the group in the end anyways, but I honestly have no idea what role he could have played in this game. It's not like they were going to make him a second playable character since Crystal already got booted from the role. As such, while I miss his signature sass, I'm willing to stomach him being absent for most of the game. As for how Adventures uses the traditional Star Fox gameplay, well, this is where a lot of fans begin to air their grievances. One thing people usually bring up is the pitifully short length of these sections, with all of them ending in under 2 minutes. This obviously caps the variety of level design you can have, and, unsurprisingly, the stages never get more complicated than simple hallways with holes to fly through. There's no alternate pathways or bosses to fight either, because your mission for these stages is to collect a certain amount of gold rings before you reach the end. That screws up the appeal of Star Fox because, you know, it's a score attack game. Shouldn't there be a points minimum for these levels? Why would you make shooting bad guys pointless in a series about shooting bad guys? I'm also not a fan of the updated controls Rare decided to go with either. The R-Wing handles a lot looser than it did back in 64, so you feel like you're zipping across the screen faster than you're supposed to. Charge shots have also been removed, taking away one of Star Fox's most satisfying mechanics. It also doesn't help that barrel rolling has been remapped to take advantage of the GameCube controller's analog triggers. You can now lean at different angles at varying trigger lengths, with a barrel roll being performed with a full press. This could have been an interesting change if the level design called for fitting in gaps at different angles, but the game never asks you to do that, so it becomes a change that screws with your muscle memory rather than being innovative. The new controls are in this uncanny valley, where it feels close enough to the previous games that you try and treat it like it's Star Fox 64, in a game that absolutely does not work like Star Fox 64. You also might have noticed that all these levels look the same, and they do. It's the same asteroid field every time, and it gets boring pretty quick. By the way, out of the 10 times you have to do R-Wing sections, they make you replay the level back to Dinosaur Planet 5 times. Jesus. As you can tell, I'm not a huge fan of what Rare decided to do with the Star Fox IP. Much of the series' trademarks have been hollowed out, like the traditional rail shooter gameplay and live dialogue. This led to a lot of Star Fox fans hating Adventures for what it wasn't, a conventional sequel to the previous games. In the years since the game's release, there's been a growing number of people frustrated that the Star Fox IP ruined the potential the original Dinosaur Planet had. And while I sympathize with this sentiment, I think it's worth talking about why Rare decided to make the decision to use the Star Fox IP in the first place. Dinosaur Planet was shown off to the public at E3 2000. At the event, Nintendo held a meeting with the Rare devs to talk about the demo, and they reportedly liked what they saw. Something Nintendo noticed though was that the game featured anthropomorphic characters going on space adventures, not unlike the pre-existing Star Fox franchise. It was there that Nintendo proposed a merger with Star Fox and Dinosaur Planet, a merger that the Rare devs accepted. And to be fair, if you're Rareware, why wouldn't you want to do this? The Star Fox IP has brand recognition that legitimizes your product to a general audience. It was also an approach between two companies that had already produced a smash hit a few years back, Diddy Kong Racing. Yeah, DKR was originally going to have Timber the Tiger as its lead before Nintendo suggested using Diddy Kong instead. The switch was a no-brainer for Rareware, and reportedly several developers were excited about the change, especially because Star Fox creators Shigeru Miyamoto and Takaya Imamura would come on to help with the transition. That transition period had largely been lost to time over lack of public documentation, since promotion for Dinosaur Planet quickly shifted to Star Fox Adventures. We do have one relic from that time period though, something that lost media like this would consider the Holy Grail. In 2021, game preservationist group Forrest of Illusions obtained and released a nearly complete build of Dinosaur Planet for the world to enjoy. I won't go into too much detail about the build here, because it really deserves its own video, but it did give us a look at what the original game was going to play like. This sparked fans' imaginations as to what could have been with the original game, but that's the thing about this whole project. The accommodation of Star Fox characters and lore didn't preclude Rare from using more of Dinosaur Planet's original story elements. In fact, the Adventures transition, even the move to the GameCube, isn't an excuse for the game being this bland. What we ended up getting is the worst of both worlds, where both IPs were gutted of their original appeal to create a wholly unsatisfying experience. Star Fox Adventures is a game where your natural curiosity is punished by having your time wasted. Think there's a goodie behind a wall? Nope. Think the NPCs might say something insightful or give you a quest? Be met with some of the driest, most vapid dialogue the adventure genre has to offer. Adventure spends its runtime meandering with half-finished ideas and underdeveloped characters, stitched together by a monotonously linear world that isn't fun to explore. Was it doomed from the start? Of course not. In fact, there's so much room to grow that I think a second attempt at a Zelda-like Star Fox could be one of the best games in the series. But that's not the world we live in. As it stands, playing Star Fox Adventures is a little like buying a Land Rover. Why the hell would you buy one when you know a Land Cruiser is better in every conceivable way? None of you are gonna get that, huh? Adventures actually ended up being the third best-selling game of the series, even making Player's Choice on Nintendo GameCube. Despite this, subsequent games have seen their sales dwindle with each passing release. Since the last time I talked about this franchise, years ago, apparently, Star Fox couldn't be in a worse place. The series' 30th anniversary came and went without so much as a tweet from Nintendo. And with Shigeru Miyamoto's reluctance to make a straightforward sequel in years past, who knows when the next adventure in the Lilat system will come around. What I do know is that Star Fox fans should bide their time by playing other adventure games and rail shooters, or by investing in fan projects made by people who actually like Star Fox. Until then, we can only hold out hope that Nintendo will grace the franchise with another game in 2035.
You know, here's what was always said around me when I was growing up. If you rearrange the letters of sister, it spells resist. And that's the truth, boy. So that's the rule right there. You know, if both y'all have the same parents, then, you know what I'm saying? You guys, no candles at dinner. You know what I'm saying?